There's a beautiful bay on the north coast of Cornwall, only a few miles from Land's End. It's called St Ives Bay, and it stretches between Godrevy Lighthouse and the island in the town of St Ives. It shapes the lives of those who live here, and there is something deep and mysterious about this connection. The bay tethers us to nature and makes us slow down to appreciate what is offered.
CO2.
1 billion tons.
Really concerned.
Fantastic.
Carbon credits.
Billions and billions and billions of tons. Shopify.
Shambon.
Who are planetary?
It was spring 2023 when rumours started swirling around St Ives about chemicals being pumped into the bay. We heard snippets of information. It was a chemical experiment, somehow linked to the climate crisis, and Elon Musk and a company called Planetary Technologies. It seemed too crazy to be true. My name's Sonara. I live in St Ives, and I want to tell you about what happened when our community suddenly woke up to an unprecedented chemical experiment happening right here in St Ives Bay. I used to make documentaries for a living. Sound check. So it seemed like a good idea to make one about this. Now, back to the mystery experiment and the locals trying to work out what was going on.
I heard about the whole experiment through my grandparents who live in Shropshire, and they're subscribed to the Times that had an article about the experiment. So they sent us the screenshot of this article because you'd a paid subscription to see it. Me and my parents were really shocked, and Mum immediately sent it to Harris at surf school.
And it was like, oh, this can't be right. We haven't heard anything about it. How's it's like, how is this happening on our doorstep and we're finding out from the Times newspaper?
They'd already done a test and no one in the community had heard about it.
At first I thought it was a hoax. This experiment had happened last September whereby magnesium hydroxide had been pumped into the bay, and it was an experiment that was going to be repeated.
Everyone I saw that day, I talked to them about it because it was such a big thing in my eyes.
It just like got you a bit worried that this could happen without you knowing in your immediate local community.
And that's how we heard of the whole experiment.
The sudden crash landing of an imminent chemical experiment blindsided us. We had so many questions and no one to ask. Just a website for this company with a Silicon Valley sounding name. Planetary Technologies. Beautiful photos, reassuring words, clean, simple science, a heroic looking founder, and loads of bright, shiny faces. They seemed so certain and so professional. They had already tested a brand new process called Ocean Alkalinity Enhancement right here in St Ives Bay, and they're about to do it again. Their stated mission: to help combat climate change. Climate change is a fact. There's too much carbon dioxide in our atmosphere because humans keep emitting way too much of it. It's causing global heating. Because of this, the oceans are becoming warmer and more acidic. This is a big problem, not only for the marine ecosystem, but also because the ocean becomes less able to absorb CO2, which is a job it naturally does already. This is where Planetary's experiment comes in. Their premise is this: they can make the ocean less acidic by adding alkalinity to it. This will allow the ocean to absorb more CO2, and this will in turn help to combat climate change. But how was Planetary going to put the alkaline in the bay? Where would they do it? Was it safe? Was Planetary a charity a research organisation? And why Elon Musk? That's when we found out that this mystery company was holding a public meeting in Hale, one of the towns looking out onto St Ives Bay.
I heard about the Hale meeting in the initial article, it mentioned that. But that was the day the meeting was going to be held, and I hadn't heard a thing before that.
So I learnt through word of mouth that there was a meeting with this company called Planetary. I knew nothing about what was happening at all.
By then, the whole event had been booked up on Eventbrite.
So when we turned up at the meeting, it was literally packed.
Me and my dad thought, oh, we'll just turn up and hope we can get in.
Planetary began by saying to us the second experiment had been agreed with South West Water and was due to take place in May, and we were in March.
The main thrust of their presentation was, you would love us, you love us for doing this. We're going to save you all.
They allowed 10 minutes for questions and then it was pasties afterwards.
How can I stop this? That was the first question someone asked.
People were saying, why are you wanting to do this in our bay?
How they explained it was quite confusing because in the article I read that morning, it was a 300-ton test. Then they said it was a 1,000-ton test.
Nobody had a proper answer. It was either going to be 40 tonnes, 100 tonnes, 400 tonnes, 1,000 tonnes.
And then at the end, I asked one of them personally, and he said 2,000 tonnes.
They weren't really sure about what their intentions were.
They didn't really explain how the company was financed or structured, and I think it was something they wanted to hide.
They almost said that they as individuals from Planetary were going to fund this. And again, that raised suspicions amongst people.
Why was Planetary initially so coy about their plan to monetize our bay by selling carbon credits, linked to the tests they'd already done and the bigger tests they planned? Turns out there's a playbook for getting a community on your side. This webinar advises companies on how to talk to the public about ocean carbon dioxide removal schemes.
Any kind of profit motive, even at a startup type of level, sometimes would trigger associations with the bigger corporate giants who are really seen as the enemies.
So don't talk about money.
Anybody who is more corporate oriented is probably not the best messenger to be putting forward.
Underplay corporate connections.
Also vocalizing the importance of a science-led movement as opposed to one led by business.
Talk about science, not business.
This is something that resonates with a lot of our audiences.
And always, you can't go wrong with pretty pictures.
We also encourage folks to use images of beautiful ocean wildlife, right? Reminding folks of why we should care about this.
Despite Planetary Technologies sticking to this non-business, non-corporate message, a lot of people in the room seemed to know that they weren't playing straight. And it didn't go down well.
The whole meeting ended up shambolic, and it ended up confused and angry.
I felt really strongly that the community was being overlooked.
It was just like they were coming in here and giving us a community consultation, and then that was just a tick box.
The pasties probably burnt.
And as for Elon Musk, his X Prize awarded Planetary Technologies $1 million in 2022, the year they did their first test in St Ives Bay. We didn't know this at the time, but as far as we can work out now, Planetary's secret ocean alkalinity test in 2022 was the first trial to ever happen in the open sea anywhere in the world. So this is uncharted territory for the ocean. It was after this disastrous first meeting that a group of locals got together to try to work out what was happening. We were all familiar with the climate crisis and the desperate need to confront global heating and ecological collapse. So how did this fit in with a company promising that it was going to heal the ocean by taking carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and storing it in the sea? Surely that could only be a good thing. If we were worried about it, did that mean we were part of the problem?
This is it? Yeah, this is bang on the spot right here. So yeah, 3.1 nautical miles long. And that's the degrees of where it is, and it's just behind us now, it's back that way.
We've come to see the sewage outfall pipe just west of Godrevy Lighthouse. So it'll be somewhere down here. After the public meeting, we realised that Planetary will be using this pipe, owned by South West Water, to discharge alkaline slurry into the bay.
Every 1 tonne of carbon removed, you'd need about 1.1 to 3.5 tonnes of alkaline material.
We decide to give our community group a name, Keep RC Chemical Free, and we decide to organise a protest. We had by this point assembled the basic facts. Mine waste from China was transported to the USA. There it was treated and then transported to the UK. Then it was taken to Cornwall and finally transported to St Ives Bay. Here it was to be pumped out in the form of an alkaline slurry along with the treated sewage. So Planetary must have some kind of deal with South West Water. And why here in St Ives Bay, nearly 3,000 miles away from Planetary's headquarters in Canada? Apparently, it's because our shallow and turbulent waters are perfect for ocean alkalinity enhancement. Many locals are intrigued by the fact that Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau met UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson smack bang in the middle of St Ives Bay at the G7 summit in 2021, a year before Planetary's initial secret test here. There is no evidence of a link, but it is an arresting coincidence. As we were digesting all this, the head honcho of Planetary Technologies, Mike Kelland, realises he needs to clear up the awful mess left by the public meeting. He's softly spoken and charming and makes it all seem so simple.
You know, if you have a heartburn or a stomach problem, you might have a Rennie that settles your stomach and gets rid of some of that acid. In the same way, when we add a mild antacid like magnesium hydroxide into seawater, it captures that CO2 and turns it into this natural part of seawater.
In full damage limitation mode, he flies from Canada to Cornwall and holds dozens of meetings with local groups and individuals. Turns out that one of these individuals would play a pivotal role in this story. Sue Sayer of the Seal Research Trust. Sue is not to be underestimated. She's an internationally renowned researcher with a deep knowledge of conditions in St Ives Bay and beyond, especially in relation to seals. Her two vice chairs had attended that public meeting in Hale.
They came back quite shocked by what they'd heard and feeling like Planetary didn't know very much about the bay. They didn't know much about the water, the fact we've got mine toxins, historical mine toxins. They didn't seem to know anything about animals and things that live in the bay. And when they asked the question, and what happens when this goes wrong, Pete's answer was, it'll be the end of Planetary.
That's Pete Chargin, who was Vice President of Planetary Technologies.
And their response was, and it'll be the end of our bay. That just set off the alarm bells, really. So by that time, then we were kind of committed to finding out more and doing stuff about it.
Pete had overseen this public relations disaster, and he too was trying to clear up the mess.
We will be removing about 200 tons of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. And in order to do that, we will add a little bit more than 400 tons of magnesium hydroxide into the ocean.
It can be hard to get our heads around these numbers. For context, A person taking a one-way economy flight from Canada to London emits about 1 tonne of carbon dioxide. Pete is saying that to remove 1 tonne of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, they need about 2 tonnes of magnesium hydroxide. It's basically a 2-to-1 ratio. Magnesium hydroxide comes with its own hefty carbon footprint. Planetary's calculation is that the carbon removal exceeds that cost, and so their experiment will have a net carbon benefit. Back to Cornwall, where local fishermen in St Ives and Hale were getting worried. This is the fishing boat Teggan Moor, which is Cornish for precious sea. It's owned and worked by Nathan D. Rosario. He was gobsmacked by the news of testing in the bay.
Fishermen didn't know what was going on. The first we knew about it was when, somebody saw it on Facebook, which would have been a link to an article from the Times or something like that.
How does that make you feel? Because that's pretty amazing.
Yeah, it doesn't make you feel very good that we're not valued. One of the key stakeholder groups who derive an income from the bay, and probably 20 or 30 families dependent on the bay, and sort of not be seen as significant or have a valid view or to provide any information to these people is poor. But unfortunately, as fishermen in this day and age, it's not uncommon. We are often the last to know.
Local fishermen brokered a meeting with Planetary, and Nathan was there.
We had a meeting just in the harbour office over there. We always try and be respectful, we always listen to what people have got to say. Our world has to live on evidence. Anything we want to do, you have the science, you have the evidence, and then you do something. So we're then listening to this guy and we're looking at ourselves going, hang on a minute, this is completely the opposite way around to what we would normally have to do. If it was us, we would have to demonstrate quite clearly that what we wanted to do had no impact on the environment or the fish stock. Whereas they are almost saying, I'm going to do an experiment and we're just going to see what happens. We think it's low risk. And that's the bit that I think really winds fishermen up, because they just keep saying, but it's very low risk. It's like, it's very low risk to you because you don't live here and you don't derive your income from the bay. We've got this iconic bay, one of the probably most famous certainly in this country, with all these different industries dependent on it being so healthy. Why would you take any risk with it? It's not about low risk. Why would you take any risk?
In late March, I also attended a meeting called by the local town councils. I was struck by a strange imbalance. Here was Planetary with its own incredibly positive spin on everything. And then there was us, local people asking them questions. I realised that Planetary were getting a free ride because none of us are experts in the science and ethics of this totally new world of marine geoengineering. There was no one properly challenging them, not the Environment Agency or South West Water, politicians or the national media. It was just us.
And I just thought, this is a very steep learning curve for us, and I'm very worried about the fact it's such a steep learning curve. But then we started to be given papers that other people had found in the local community.
Sue is talking about scientific papers, published and peer-reviewed.
And there were 2 in particular that I remember. One is that often the magnesium hydroxide chemical reactions mean that there might be particulates, and the particulates could be toxic, and if they settle and they get trapped in sediments, then they'll be there for a long time and they won't dissolve, which is what they're intended to do if they're going to be able to draw down carbon. So that was very worrying. And then there was another paper as well that just suggested that there wasn't an awful lot of evidence about potentially very harmful impacts on ecosystems.
This was our first insight into the fact that maybe not all science was as positive about this as Planetary's had suggested. But I still found it hard to escape the nagging doubt that maybe we were standing in the way of genuine progress in the climate crisis. Every question we ask is smoothed away by Planetary. No need for an environmental impact assessment. The experiment is way too small for that. Worried about the ecosystem? No need. We formulated our own system of monitoring and our own codes of conduct and safety. There was no counter-narrative for us. All that changed for me when I found a statement from the International Maritime Organization, the IMO. It's a specialised agency of the United Nations. Among many other responsibilities, it's in charge of regulating dumping at sea. I found a document dated October 2022. This statement recognises the growing interest into marine geoengineering techniques and their potential to cause pollution or other adverse effects on the marine environment. And there it is. It's right there as one of the 4 techniques they're most worried about, enhancing ocean alkalinity. So we were right to be concerned. Top scientists at the United Nations were pointing out the potential for this all to go horribly wrong. It made us feel confident that a protest was the right thing to do. We just didn't know if anyone would turn up.
Yeah, it was actually my first protest that I've been to. Didn't think I was the protest type. It felt like that for a lot of people actually. I was like, yeah, we're not really protesters. Like, not. What do you do at protest?
So I thought, well, I'm not a protester. That's not really my personality or my cup of tea, but I'm quite happy to go and present what I've understood about some of the science.
I had a surf conf in the morning, so I rushed from my heat in the finals to the protest, and I had a speech to read, which was quite nerve-wracking, but I'd spent a few weeks trying to perfect the speech.
It was incredible. All of a sudden these red flags on large bamboo poles appeared, and it was so moving to see so many people.
Literally hundreds of people turned up. Wow! People are concerned about their environment.
There's a real sense of strong community purpose.
We are a community under constant pressure. It feels like a never-ending war of attrition as this place is squeezed for profit in every direction.
Excuse me if I falter, I've never spoken to so many people in all my life. Planetary is a business and people and companies will be investing, buying enthusiastically their carbon credits.
A lack of homework by Planetary, an inadequate understanding of the science specific to St Ives Bay, and a complete lack of knowledge about St Ives Bay marine ecosystem. Best case, no impact. Worst case, no fish, no seals, no surfers, no tourism.
I would really like people to know, when damage is done, you can't undo it.
This bay has housed my most memorable experiences. It has shown me how remarkable the natural world is. It is the place I can just be with myself, be with my thoughts, be with my family, be with my friends, be in nature.
I know I couldn't be without the sea, and I also know that I'm not alone. Please think of it like this and not as an experiment.
The protest was an incredibly important moment for us. Suddenly we had visibility and an identity, not just in Cornwall but internationally. Now, when journalists or researchers talked about ocean alkalinity enhancement, they talked about what was happening right here in St Ives Bay. But more important than all this, our community had come together to support and inform and to find strength and solidarity for whatever was to come.
It was kind of like inspiring just to hear words coming out of these very young people's mouths that are lifting everyone and stirring a lot of emotion as well, actually.
It was just such a beautiful getting together of people who felt passionate about their bay.
The power I felt from all of those people together in support of the bay, not against Planetary, but showing their support to the bay.
And it just felt like everyone really cared for this place, and that I wasn't the only one.
It was a very uplifting experience, and it kind of showed that the community needed a voice.
Yeah, honestly, it'll be a day I'll never forget. It gave me so much hope.
And then the waiting game started. Would a second test happen in St Ives Bay? And if so, when? Planetary was scrabbling to alter their test parameters, but the Environment Agency had halted the licensing process. They said they needed more information, something the community had been asking for from the start of all this. It felt like everyone involved was winging it.
Because this is brand new, nobody's ever thought about how it should be regulated. It needs to have proper rules and regulations that people have to follow, proper codes of conduct, because frankly, I could have written a better code of conduct than the one that Planetary Technologies had originally on their website.
This need for regulation and transparency became very clear when news of Planetary's secret test in September 2022 was revealed the following year.
We were doing our routine seal monitoring, and an absolutely extraordinary thing happened. A large number of seals, up to 150, started using a haul out further away from the release site than they've ever done before, and it's a site they've never used before. So we were just left thinking, why on earth has this happened? And then come March the following year, we discovered that actually a release had happened 10 weeks earlier. So seals have more sensitive muzzles than the palms of our hands. Every whisker has 1,500 nerve endings. We have no idea what their muzzles can detect in terms of water chemistry. In no way can I be sure that this movement of seals and the use of this brand new haul out is linked to Planetary at all. I can't be sure about that. But equally, nobody can tell me definitively that the two things aren't linked. And the really scary thing is, this is concrete data. We know that seals have never used this site in these numbers before, and this is better data than Planetary have.
Data. This is another major concern. Not only the lack of data about how magnesium hydroxide affects the specific ecosystem of the bay, but a lack of data about the bay as it is right now.
Baselining is when you get a really good understanding of what is already there, then you do the experiment, and then you look to see what has changed as a result of the experiment. And it's very easy to not be looking at the right things or in the right places. Currently, there have been 2 days of baselining around the outfall. We need to be looking well beyond the outflow. And they need to be looking at everything from stuff on the seabed, from the base of the food chain, all the way up to the top of the food chain. And here in St Ives Bay, the top of the food chain are dolphins, seals and seabirds. And they need to be gathering data on those.
Planetary had always insisted that their 2 days of baseline monitoring was perfectly adequate for the experiment they wanted to do in 2023.
Now I would like to pass over to, I'm guessing, Michael.
Kudos to them for agreeing to present their findings to the Cornwall Carbon Scrutiny Group in early 2024.
And thank you, Samara, and thank you for setting this up. It's wonderful, as you say, to see everybody.
This was a moment I'd been waiting for. It was the first time I'd witnessed scientists unconnected to Planetary asking them direct questions.
To share. Sonara, want to stick to your agenda. And
Dr. Will Burt, Planetary's chief scientist, was asked about their baseline survey in the bay.
So we would not have gone into a trial and called this a baseline, by no means. If I don't make the rules here, but I would say that, you need to have a seasonal baseline. That's the lowest frequency that you can get away with in terms of trying to understand a system is seasonal. Certainly in this part of the world, one time point is not a baseline.
Dr. Will Burt goes on to explain that Planetary plans to gather more baseline data each time they test in the bay, so that when they have fully scaled up the operation, they will have a good data set.
During a 1 week trial to say that
David
it's fundamentally
Santillo,
changed now and there's
senior
no more
scientist
baseline.
with the
So I would
Greenpeace
like to
Research
think
Laboratory,
that we could
points
create
out a
really strong
fundamental
understanding of the
contradiction in
system
this.
over the course of years.
I understand the commitment to go and get multiple years of data, but if at the same time you're already conducting trials, then you're, in theory at least, potentially changing the system that you're studying, and therefore it's no longer a baseline that you're building up.
Yep, I think that's all fair. In our site here in Canada, we've got a much bigger baseline to work with.
It felt like a very calm and polite mic drop moment. Planetary were admitting publicly to an intrinsic flaw in their approach to baseline data collection, admitting that what they had done didn't constitute a baseline at all. And if you don't have a proper baseline, how can you conduct an experiment? Back to 2023 as the months rolled by and we waited for a decision on the experiment in the Bay. In August, the Environment Agency told us they'd hired a third party to analyse the available evidence. It felt like recognition from a major government agency that they simply didn't have the expertise to deal with this issue on their own. Cut to spring 2024. A full year after we'd first found out about testing in the Bay. And we were still waiting to see if Planetary were going to get permission to restart testing.
I can't take it anymore.
The Environment Agency had finally received the report it commissioned regarding the proposed experiment. Planetary was delighted with the headline takeaway. The planned experiment was very low risk. But we still had concerns. The report also stated the medium risk of precipitation, which was something that had always worried scientists like Sue. And of course, there was no proper seasonal baseline. We were also convinced that there needed to be better research on potential impacts before ocean testing. The only species tested by Planetary had been a single stickleback. We weren't alone. The Environment Agency was now also calling for the use of long-term data on multiple appropriate marine species. They also gave Planetary a slap on the wrist for the opaque sourcing of their magnesium hydroxide from China, but they were permitted to use it for the next test. It felt like Planetary was a step closer to testing in the Bay. Time to gather once again. This time we decide to focus on South West Water and its role in this joint enterprise.
We have a message for South West Water, one of the most polluting water companies in the country that already dumps horrendous amounts of raw sewage into this bay. We say South West Water, pull out of your murky deal with Planetary Technologies. We say South West Water, don't sell out our bay.
The number of local fishing and trip boats that joined the protest was unprecedented. It felt like a powerful coming together of different parts of our community. Over this last year, we'd insisted on a conversation about testing in the Bay, about potential risks to the marine ecosystem, about the lack of baseline data, about carbon credits monetising our bay, about the risk of greenwashing, and so much more. And there was another overarching question looming over all of this. Is marine geoengineering really what our planet needs to combat the climate crisis? There's no doubt that the climate crisis is an existential threat to life on Earth. Global carbon dioxide emissions from fossil fuels and industry are currently at 37 billion tonnes per year. Planetary Technologies' stated aim was to remove 1 billion tonnes of carbon dioxide by 2035. This seemingly impossible ambition, described as insane by Planetary itself, reflects the fact that geoengineering companies like Planetary have to aim for gigantic scale in order to have any meaningful impact. Planetary would need billions of tonnes of magnesium hydroxide, and this would mean a brand new and enormous global industry with a massive carbon footprint, including mining, processing, purifying, and all the logistics of getting the alkaline material into the ocean at thousands of locations around the world. Proponents of ocean alkalinity enhancement argue that the carbon costs will be worth it if enough carbon dioxide is subsequently removed from the atmosphere. And this brings us to another big issue. There's no physical way of checking that this process is actually working and removing carbon dioxide. Instead, we have to rely on modelling, notoriously difficult, especially in complex and changing ocean systems that aren't fully understood. The United Nations had by now released a much stronger warning about ocean alkalinity enhancement, the potential for deleterious effects that are widespread, long-lasting or severe. It also states that there is considerable uncertainty regarding their effects on the marine environment, human health, and on other uses of the ocean. With such risk and uncertainty, does focusing on ocean alkalinity enhancement make sense? Or should we be pushing for better ways to combat the climate crisis? Perhaps our starting point should be recognising how complex and mysterious and beautiful the oceans are. That natural ocean systems already do a huge amount to balance our climate. That reducing emissions is our primary task and one we cannot be distracted from. And that safe, nature-based solutions already exist to help combat climate change, and they can do so in a way that benefits communities. One thing's for sure, a chemical equation can't measure the knowledge and love of a community living in connection with the sea. And it seems to me that this human connection has to be a part of understanding the role of our oceans in this climate crisis.
St Ives Bay, I see it every day. It never gets old and I never take it for granted. It's something I appreciate every single day.
For me, St Ives Bay is my view upon wildness. It is wild.
I know exactly what the conditions are of that day just by looking out the window and seeing the sea and the way the wind's blowing across the bay.
The bay for me is that beautiful, clear water and that feeling of being submerged in the sea.
I surf, I swim, I don't know if you could count pier jumping.
It makes you feel like you're part of something bigger other than the human race, I suppose. Like, you're part of the world. It brings you into nature fully.
It just feels like it's in my blood, like the sea is part of me.
It reminds me that I am a small person in a big world.
I think it's just like a map more than anything. It's a sort of map of experiences and memories in my head. It's just shaped me into who I am.